The National Priorities Project is a national organization based in Northampton, Mass. that was the 2014 nominee for the Nobel Peace Prize. They were nominated for their 30-year history of pioneering work in analyzing U.S. federal spending on the military and promoting a national budget that represents Americans' priorities. Here joining me today is Joe Comerford, who is their executive director, and Dennis Bidwell, who's chair of National Priorities Project's Board of Directors. So thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Joe, we're going to start with you. Talk about receiving the news that you guys were nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize.
Well, you know, it was such a tremendous honor. Dennis was the first person I phoned, and we also phoned, of course, our founder's wife, Betsy Speeder, and the three of us, I think, were so moved by this ratification, really, of NPP's work for 3 decades, really cracking open the federal budget and helping Americans have a meaningful say on our nation's spending and revenue priorities.
What do you think that they saw in NPP that kind of just drew them to you guys and said they need to be nominated?
It was wonderful to be reminded by them that in taking an international view of the work of National Priorities Project, they clearly saw, and it's helped us now to see, that not only does our work have significance nationally, but internationally. When an esteemed organization like this says that what NPP does to keep a focus on the U.S. budget and how out of proportion military spending is with other vital areas, and that it has ripple effects literally throughout the world, it made us all sort of sit back and say, wow, this is significant work we're doing. And I'd say it's, and I've talked with staff, Joe's staff, enough to know that folks feel really emboldened by this. And wow, this is significant work. So there's more to be done.
We're going to get in more details about military spending. Before we do that, though, kind of explain what NPP is. If somebody's not familiar with you guys, what do you guys do? What are you there for?
Well, the elevator pitch is that we consider ourselves the people's guide to the federal budget. Our job is to take this unbelievably large, complex, and often opaque and highly politicized document, and we have to crack it open for regular people across the nation. Because, in fact, you and I, through our payroll and individual income taxes, right, we're the major investors in this budget. And our democracy says we have a right and a responsibility to pay taxes and act as investors, and we should have a say in what that budget looks like. And far too often, we're disenfranchised and or not listened to the depths that we need to be. And so our priorities aren't represented. Congresswoman Barbara Lee just calls the budget our nation's moral values and numbers, right? So we consider ourselves guardians of that budget for the people.
Sometimes people can look at it and kind of, it overwhelms them. You know, like, oh, I just put it on my mind. I'm just going to go back. You know, I've got to go to my job. I've got to pay my bills. And I guess they don't realize how much it impacts them.
Every second of every day. I mean, the lights that we have on around us, the electricity, the air we're breathing, the food we ate today, our roads, bridges, our health care, it's all actually our money coming back to us, legislated through Congress. And really, it is everything that we consider our livelihood and well-being is touched by the federal budget.
How has your understanding of the budget changed since being involved with NPP?
Well, that's an interesting question. I've certainly come to understand the intricacies of the process and how out of whack the process is with the way it's supposed to run. And I've certainly better understood this enormous disconnect between what the people's will is, as expressed in polling data, and where the dollars really get spent. And of course, that brings to the surface the disproportion between military spending at the expense of everything else. But I think seeing the numbers, seeing the pie charts, digesting the pie charts, understanding what they mean, but then seeing the extent to which people throughout the country use this organization, local community organizers, politicians, media, educators, I think that's probably been the most eye-opening experience, just to see how broadly used and important this cracked open federal budget information is.
The president just released his budget proposal. We're going to talk about that, but piggybacking of what you just said, a lot of different organizations were sharing the work that you had done. And do you feel you guys just break it down on a different level where it's actually understandable? When I read it, I understand what you're saying. Do you feel like that's kind of what sets NPP apart from everyone else?
Absolutely. So in a field of federal budget research organizations nationally, many of which are located in Washington, D.C., we are exactly that. We're the humanizers, the popularizers. We take a highly contentious process and a really complex document, and we deliver it to the people. And we think of ourselves sometimes as the bridge between what's happening in Washington, D.C. and what's happening in towns like Northampton or Springfield. And then we also help folks in those local communities get to our nation's capital armed with facts, because numbers and facts, they don't lie, right? They can't be spun. If we have a fact, we're stronger and we're sharper and a better advocate for what we need and want.
So talk about the budget proposal that just came out by the president.
$3.9 trillion. It's a very large blueprint. It sets a vision that's slightly different from the one that Chairman Ryan and Senator Patty Murray passed. So President Obama is looking to invest in especially education, but not that only, right? He's keeping his commitment to transportation and our nation's infrastructure. He's begun the conversation about tax reform that has been stalled for quite some time now in Congress. So he's looking to tweak corporate taxes and also individual taxes for the wealthiest Americans. They're small tweaks, right, but they still are tweaks nonetheless. And he is actually choosing to spend more on the military.
Which is surprising because normally you don't find that in a Democratic presidency. What does that mean?
Yeah, we have to unpack that for NPP. NPP staff has to unpack that as we go forward, but it is confusing. And here's a piece of what might be behind it, which is that when Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel spoke before the nation and said, we're being hollowed out and we're being left in a very precarious position, his rhetoric does not match the facts. In fact, because of a lot of givebacks and wiggles and slush funds that have been afforded to the Pentagon by Congress, in fact, the Pentagon has had no such suffering. Domestic programs have. They've been held to account and they've seen the impact of sequestration, but not the Pentagon. And so, it's unclear to us why the White House would come in when those are actually the facts, not matching the rhetoric, but those are the facts, and then give actually more money to the tune of an extra $115 billion over 10 years. And we're on it. We're on the case. So our team released a piece today that's all over the internet calling forward the mismatch, the disconnect between rhetoric and fact, and we're going to continue to hold the White House accountable to this. We're going to be fighting this process all along the way, again, so that folks can fight and really speak up with their own national priorities.
Now, there's also a webinar coming up, and we'll get right back to you about that. But let me ask you, Dennis, what is in, let's say, the 1 or 2 year plan for NPP? Where do you guys see yourselves in the future?
Good question. We're in the middle of a planning process designed to answer that question, but clearly we recognize that we need to maintain a balance between being the people's voice out here based in Northampton, but to have a very robust Washington presence. We clearly need to further build our board of directors and our donor base nationally. We will always have our heart here in Western Massachusetts, but we've been quite successful in recent years in nationalizing the organization, both in its governance structure and in its donor base. So there's a lot more of that to come, and it's programmatically. I'm not sure that we could say that there's going to be too much different than what we've been doing, because we're hearing the message that people like what we're doing, international bodies like what we're doing, so we're going to keep this razor-like focus on the federal budget process and the federal budget outcomes and how out of line those are with what people want.
And I'm sure we could spend forever talking about the budget itself that just came out, and people can argue military spending versus, federal programs to help Americans. I mean, I'm sure you must get that kind of, everybody wants almost like it seems like their piece of the pie, but do you think sometimes just the average American is not getting the piece of the pie they should be getting?
Well, as Dennis mentioned, polling data tells us a pretty clear picture about what Americans want and need. And in many areas, it does not match as fully as it possibly could with the actions of Congress and or this budget blueprint. And, you know, I think one of the things I say when we're out on the road is that every single federal dollar coming back is directed toward a human being, is directed toward a person. And every single dollar creates a job of some kind, either directly or indirectly. And so, you know, if we start with that basic understanding of the value in this beautiful document that has an impact on our lives every second, then it's our job then to shape it for our nation's and our world's collective best interest. And if we start there, I feel like it takes us away from that, oh, I want this and you want this, and, you know, keeps us at odds with each other and puts us in the big pot of Americans fighting for a nation, the promise of our nation, which really is the job, I think, of this budget, is to fulfill that promise.
And if people have further questions about the proposal, there's a webinar coming up on March 19th.
Exactly. That's the Women's Legislative Lobby, which is a national body of state legislators, one of MPP's terrific national partners, and the Women's Action for New Directions are sponsoring an NPP webinar. It's a Federal Budget 101 webinar. We're going to certainly talk about the issues, some of which we've covered today, and everybody's welcome. And of course, they can go to our website or follow us on Twitter or Facebook. And then actually, we answer many, many info requests every single year, our team. We're a scrappy, small team, but we manage to get them out. So folks should also contact us directly with questions.
Great, small team, but making a big impact. Joe Comerford and Dennis Bidwell from National Priorities Project, thank you.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much.